By the time Emily Carter realized the carriage was not hers, the storm had already locked the door behind her. The rain came down hard over Boston, striking the cobblestones like 1,000 impatient fingers, turning the narrow street outside the dressmaker's shop into a black ribbon of water and reflected lanterns. Emily ran with one hand gripping her small carpet bag and the other pressed over the folded letter hidden inside her cloak, the last letter her mother had ever written, soft at the creases from too many years of being opened in secret. Behind her, in the boarding house she had fled, her uncle's voice still seemed to follow through the weather. Ungrateful girl. A debt must be paid. A promise once made cannot be taken back. But Emily had made no promise. Mr. Silas Carter had made it for her, selling her future across a parlor table to a man with heavy rings, cold eyes, and enough money to erase a debt that had never been hers. She had not screamed. She had not wept where they could see. She had waited until the house slept, wrapped herself in her plain wool cloak, and stepped into the storm with only $12, 2 clean collars, and the stubborn dignity of a woman who would rather face the road than be handed over like property. The hired carriage was supposed to wait at the corner near the apothecary, a plain brown one with a cracked lantern and a driver named Ellis, if the laundress could be trusted. But the storm blurred every shape. Wheels hissed through water. Horses stamped and tossed their heads. A black carriage stood at the curb with its door open, rain shining along the polished side, the lanterns swinging wildly in the wind. Emily saw only shelter, a dark interior, and the chance to disappear before her uncle discovered her empty room. She climbed in, pulled the door shut, and whispered, "Drive, please." Quickly, the carriage moved at once. Too smoothly, too silently. Not like a rented hack with tired springs, but like something built for wealth and distance. Emily's breath caught. She leaned toward the window, wiping rain from the glass with her glove, but the street had already fallen away behind a curtain of water. "Stop," she called. "Driver, stop." The wheels did not slow. Then a voice spoke from the opposite corner of the carriage. "The driver will not hear you in this weather." Emily froze. A man sat across from her, half hidden by shadow, his black greatcoat blending with the dark velvet seat. Lightning whitened the window for a heartbeat, revealing a severe face, pale and still, with eyes as gray as wet stone. He did not look surprised to find a drenched young woman in his carriage. That made him more frightening. "Sir," Emily said, pulling her cloak tighter though it was already soaked through, "I have made a mistake." "That is apparent." His voice was low, controlled, not cruel, but cold enough to make the small space feel larger. "This is not a public carriage. I thought it was mine." Women often mistake ducal carriages for hired ones during storms. Her cheeks warmed despite the chill. Women running for their lives do not always inspect crests in the rain. The words escaped before caution could stop them. The man's gaze sharpened, but he did not lean forward, did not demand, did not soften. He only watched her with the guarded stillness of someone who trusted neither accidents nor pleas. "Your name?" "Emily Carter." "From Boston?" "Yes." "And where were you intending to go?" She looked down at her gloved hands. Water dripped from the edge of her cloak onto the fine carriage floor, each drop sounding indecently loud. "Anywhere that was not behind me." For the first time, something moved in his expression, not pity, not warmth, but recognition so brief it vanished almost at once. Outside, thunder rolled over the road. The carriage turned away from the city, heading north through wind-bent trees and empty dark. Emily reached for the door handle, then stopped when the vehicle lurched over a rut. The man's hand lifted, not touching her, only warning her back from danger. "Do not be foolish," he said. "At this speed, in this storm, you would do yourself no kindness." "Then tell him to stop." "He cannot. The South Bridge floods quickly. If we are not across before the water rises, none of us return tonight." "Return where?" He looked toward the rain-streaked window. "Ashford Hall." The name settled between them like a locked gate. Even Emily, who owned nothing fine and knew little of aristocratic circles, had heard of Ashford Hall. A house above the coast. A widowed duke who no longer opened his doors. A wife lost years ago in a storm no one discussed plainly. She swallowed. "You are Duke Ashford. Henry Ashford." No pride. No invitation. Only fact. The carriage rocked forward into deeper darkness, and Emily understood that the door she had closed behind herself had not led to escape. It had carried her into a grieving man's world, and the storm, with all its merciless rain, had made both of them prisoners of the same night. The name Ashford Hall seemed to change the air inside the carriage. Emily Carter sat very still, her wet cloak gathered tightly around her knees, while Duke Henry Ashford watched the storm through the dark window, as though the rain had spoken to him before and he did not care to answer it again. The road beyond Boston had narrowed into a strip of mud and shining stone, with pine trees bending hard beneath the wind on either side. Every few minutes, lightning revealed the world in white fragments, a fence half swallowed by weeds, a flooded ditch, a mile marker leaning like a tired old man, the black neck of the nearest horse tossing against its harness. Then darkness returned, thicker than before. Emily tried to steady her breathing. She had escaped one prison only to enter a carriage belonging to a man whose grief had become a legend. That did not mean he was wicked. Legends were often built by people who feared silence. Still, fear touched her fingers where they gripped her carpet bag. Henry noticed the gesture. "You need not clutch that as if I intend to steal it." Emily looked down. "It contains everything I own. Then you are wise to hold it." The answer was neither mockery nor comfort. It was simply true, and that unsettled her more than kindness might have. "Your Grace, I did not know this was your carriage. You have said so, and I do not expect shelter from you. No one said you would receive it." The words were cold, but his eyes moved toward the window again, not toward her face. Emily understood then that his hardness was not entirely aimed at her. It filled the carriage because it filled him. "Then let me down at the nearest inn. There is no inn before Ashford Land. A farmhouse. At this hour, in this weather, you would knock on strangers' doors with no escort and no name they trust." She had no answer. Rain struck the roof with such force that it sounded like handfuls of gravel. The carriage dipped suddenly, and Emily braced herself against the side. Henry's hand moved again, hovering a few inches from her arm, then withdrew the moment she regained balance. He did not touch her. That restraint, small and exact, told her more about him than his title did. "The South Bridge is ahead," he said. "If it has flooded, we stop at the Gate Lodge until morning. And if it has not, we continue to Ashford Hall." His voice tightened almost imperceptibly on the name, as if home were not a place of rest but a sentence. Emily looked at him through the dimness. "Do you dislike returning there? Servants should ask fewer questions." "I am not your servant." "No, you are a stranger in my carriage." "Then strangers may ask what servants cannot." Lightning flashed. For one sharp second, she saw his face fully, handsome still in the severe bones and grave mouth, but marked by years of mourning rather than age. He was not old, not even close, yet sorrow had made him seem carved from winter. His gaze returned to her with warning in it. "You mistake desperation for courage, Miss Carter." "Perhaps, but desperation carried me farther tonight than obedience ever did." The carriage fell silent. Outside, the wheels splashed into standing water. The horses slowed. A man shouted from the box, his voice nearly swallowed by wind. Henry leaned forward and opened the small speaking panel. "What is it?" The driver called back. "Bridge is rising fast, Your Grace. We can cross now, but not later." Henry looked through the front glass. Emily could see nothing but rain and the swinging lantern. "Cross," he ordered. The carriage moved onto the bridge. Water rushed below, loud and restless. Emily closed her eyes, not from faintness, but because the sound reminded her too much of being carried where she had not chosen to go. Her uncle's parlor. The promised marriage. The locked expectation of a life handed over in payment. "Miss Carter." Henry's voice reached her through the roar. Her eyes opened. "Breathe slowly." She obeyed before pride could object. "In. Out." The bridge groaned beneath the wheels, not dangerously, but enough to make her heart strike hard. Henry did not speak again until the carriage reached solid road. "There," he said, "you remain free to despise my company on safer ground." A laugh almost escaped her, exhausted and startled, but she held it back. "I do not despise your company. That is generous. I have not had time to form a proper dislike." Something moved near his mouth, vanishing before it became a smile. Then the carriage turned between two stone pillars, and Ashford Hall appeared beyond the rain, high on its coastal rise, its windows dark except for a few trembling lights. It was not merely large. It was watchful. The house looked as if it had been waiting years for someone who never came back. As they approached, Emily saw pale cloths covering several windows from within, and an upper eastern wing standing completely unlit. Henry followed her gaze. "You will not wander," he said. "You will not ask the staff questions. You will remain one night only if the roads are closed. At dawn, arrangements will be made. I understand. Do you?" His eyes were colder now, but beneath the cold lay something raw and guarded. Women who enter this house during storms bring no good with them. Emily held his gaze, her wet hair clinging to her cheek, her carpetbag still clutched in both hands. Then perhaps this house has blamed the storm for too long. The carriage stopped before the great doors. For a moment, neither of them moved. Rain streamed down the glass between them and the night outside. Henry looked at her as if she had touched a locked door without knowing it was sacred. Then he opened the carriage door and stepped into the storm first, turning back only enough to offer his hand without softness, without warmth, but with exact courtesy. Emily looked at that hand, then placed her gloved fingers lightly over his. The moment lasted no longer than a breath. Yet when she stepped down onto Ashford stone, the house seemed to inhale around them. The doors of Ashford Hall opened before Henry could lift the iron knocker. Warmth spilled out first, then candlelight, then the severe figure of Mrs. Abigail Rowe, who stood in the entrance as though she had been carved there by duty. Her gray hair was pinned with perfect discipline, her black dress was plain, and her eyes moved from the Duke's rain-dark coat to the young woman beside him with a pause so brief that only a frightened person would have noticed it. Emily noticed. "Your Grace," Mrs. Rowe said. "The bridge crossed before it closed. No one leaves tonight." Henry stepped into the hall, and Emily followed only after he gave the smallest motion of permission. The floor beneath her boots was black and white marble, cold even through wet soles. Above her, a chandelier trembled in the draught, its crystals giving back little fragments of candle flame. The entrance hall rose 2 stories high, yet it felt strangely breathless, as if the walls had learned long ago to keep secrets and had never been told they might speak again. Portraits lined the staircase, most of them uncovered, but one large frame at the landing wore a white sheet from top to bottom. Emily looked away before anyone could accuse her of staring. Mrs. Rowe did not miss the movement. "A room should be prepared?" she asked. "The blue guest room," Henry said. Mrs. Rowe's expression changed for less than a heartbeat. "The blue room has not been used in some time. Then it will remember its purpose." The housekeeper bowed her head. "Very good, Your Grace." Emily tightened her grip on her carpetbag. "I do not require a guest room. A chair near the kitchen fire would be enough until morning." Mrs. Rowe looked at her then, not unkindly, but with the caution of someone measuring both truth and trouble. Henry removed his gloves. "You will not sleep in a chair in my house. I have slept in worse places." That is not a recommendation. The answer left no room for argument, yet it was not tender enough to embarrass her. It was simply a line drawn against needless humiliation. Emily bowed her head. "Thank you. Thank Mrs. Rowe. She will see you properly settled." He turned toward the west corridor, then stopped when thunder shook the windows hard enough to make the candles flicker. For one instant, every servant in sight went still. Not because of the sound itself, Emily realized, but because of what it awakened in him. Henry's face had emptied. His gaze had moved past the hall, past the storm, toward a night none of them could see. Mrs. Rowe spoke gently. "Your Grace." He returned at once, like a man shutting a door from the inside. "Send word to the stables. No one attempts the bridge until daylight." "Yes, Your Grace." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the dim corridor, leaving behind the smell of rain, cold air, and something unspoken. Mrs. Rowe turned to Emily. "Come with me, Miss Carter." The use of her name surprised her. "His Grace told you?" "His Grace tells me what is necessary. The rest I observe." They climbed the staircase slowly. Emily's wet hem brushed the marble steps. At the landing, they passed the covered portrait. The sheet moved slightly in the draught, revealing the gold edge of the frame beneath. Mrs. Rowe's hand tightened around her candle. "That portrait is not to be touched." "I was not going to touch it." Many people do not intend to trespass until curiosity opens their hand. Emily accepted the warning in silence. The blue guest room lay at the end of a long corridor overlooking the dark gardens. It was finer than any room she had ever slept in. Blue damask curtains, a carved bed, a small fire already being lit by a maid, fresh towels, and a screen placed near the hearth for privacy. Yet the room felt less like welcome than ceremony. Every object seemed arranged for someone expected years ago and never received. Mrs. Rose set her candle on the mantel. Dry clothing will be brought. Nothing fashionable, I am afraid. Dry is a luxury. The housekeeper studied her again. Are you truly here by mistake? Emily met the question without offense. Yes. And truly running from something? Emily looked toward the rain-lashed window. Also yes. Mrs. Rose's severity softened at the edges, though she did not allow it to become comfort. Then tonight you will rest. Tomorrow, truth will have daylight enough. She turned to leave, but Emily spoke before she could stop herself. Mrs. Rowe, why is the eastern wing dark? The silence that followed felt colder than the storm. The housekeeper's face closed. Because some rooms do not require light. She left with that, the door closing softly behind her. Emily stood alone in the blue room, wrapped in borrowed warmth, listening as Ashford Hall creaked and sighed around her. From somewhere below, faint and distant, came the sound of a piano string answering the thunder, though no one was playing. Emily moved toward the window and saw the eastern wing beyond the rain, black against the restless sky. She had entered the wrong carriage to escape a life chosen for her. Now she stood inside a house where grief had chosen every room. And somewhere in that darkness, Duke Henry Ashford was not merely mourning the dead. He was still asking forgiveness from them. Emily Carter did not sleep at once. The blue guest room was too warm after the storm, too quiet after the carriage, too fine for a woman who had spent most of her life folding other people's hems and pretending not to envy the gowns she mended. The borrowed nightdress lay across the chair, plain but clean, and a wool blanket had been placed near the fire with such care that it made her throat tighten. She had expected suspicion. She had expected a locked door, perhaps a stern watch below the stairs, perhaps a cold order to remain unseen until morning. She had not expected dignity. That made Ashford Hall more dangerous in a way she did not know how to name. Kindness could loosen the hard knot that had kept her standing. Near midnight, thunder moved farther out over the coast, but the wind still worried the old windows. Emily rose, wrapped herself in the blanket, and crossed to the hearth where her mother's letter rested beside her carpet bag. She unfolded it by firelight. My dearest Emily, never let hunger make you believe you are worth less than those who dine at polished tables. The sentence had carried her through years of unpaid gratitude in her uncle's house, through the dressmaker's long hours, through the suffocating parlor where Silas Carter had explained that a young woman without money should be thankful when any man offered security. Emily pressed the letter to her chest. Then, from somewhere beyond the wall, came the sound again. A single piano string trembling in the dark. She stood still. It came once more, faint, accidental, like memory brushing against wire. Emily should have stayed in the room. Mrs. Rose's warning remained clear. Some rooms do not require light. Yet the sound seemed less like invitation than distress, and she had spent too long obeying doors that locked pain away for the convenience of others. She opened her door and stepped into the corridor with the candle from the mantel. Ashford Hall at night was a different house. The grand staircase fell away into shadow. Covered portraits watched from beneath white sheets. Rain traced silver paths down the window panes. Emily followed the faint sound through the upper corridor until she reached the turn toward the eastern wing. There, a rope barrier hung between two brass posts, not enough to stop anyone, only enough to declare that grief had authority. Beyond it, the hall lay colder, its carpet dark, its lamps unlit. At the far end, a door stood slightly open. The piano note shivered again. Emily crossed the barrier. The room beyond was not a bedroom, as she had feared, but a small music room overlooking the sea. Dust softened the piano keys. A portrait on the wall had been covered with a pale cloth. A silver-framed photograph lay face down on a table beside a dried bouquet, brittle with years. The window had come loose in the wind, and each gust moved the curtain cord against the piano strings, making the ghostly sound. Emily set down her candle and closed the window latch. Silence fell so suddenly that it felt like being discovered. You were told not to wander. Henry Ashford stood in the doorway, dressed in dark house clothes, his face pale in the candlelight. He did not shout. He did not need to. The room itself seemed to flinch for him. Emily turned slowly. I heard the piano. No one plays that instrument. I know. The wind was touching the strings. His eyes moved to the closed window, then to the covered portrait, then back to her. You had no right to enter this room. No, she did not defend herself. That appeared to anger him more than an excuse would have. Then why are you still standing here? Because leaving quickly would make it seem as if I came to steal something. And did you? Only a sound that did not belong to me. For a moment, his expression wavered, grief rising beneath discipline. Emily saw how carefully the room had been preserved. The covered portrait, the dried flowers, the music untouched, the air not allowed to move. This was not remembrance. This was punishment arranged as devotion. This room belonged to the Duchess, he said. Her name was Margaret. Emily lowered her gaze. Then I am sorry for entering it. Do not speak as though apology cleans trespass. The words were hard, but the hurt beneath them was older than her mistake. She looked at the covered portrait and then at him, not boldly, not softly, simply honestly. Some rooms stay locked because the living are afraid to forgive themselves. The silence after her sentence was absolute. Henry's face changed as if she had opened a door no storm had managed to force. Leave, he said. Emily picked up her candle and passed him without another word. At the corridor, she looked back once. The Duke stood alone in the music room, one hand resting on the closed window latch, listening to the silence she had made. For the first time, the room did not sound haunted. It sounded waiting. Morning came reluctantly to Ashford Hall, pale and gray, with the storm still muttering over the sea as if it had not finished speaking. Emily Carter had slept only in fragments, waking each time the house shifted or the rain pressed hard against the glass. When the maid brought hot water and a simple dark dress borrowed from the household stores, Emily thanked her so earnestly that the girl looked startled. By breakfast, the bridge remained closed. The road to Boston lay under several inches of floodwater, and Mrs. Rowe informed Emily with strict composure that she would remain at Ashford Hall until travel became safe. His Grace has ordered it, the housekeeper said, setting a tray of toast, tea, and eggs on the small table near the blue room window. Ordered, Emily repeated. For your protection, not your imprisonment. Mrs. Rowe's eyes softened by a fraction. There is a difference, though frightened people sometimes struggle to believe it. Emily looked down at the tea. She knew that was true. She also knew protection could become a prettier word for possession in the wrong mouth. By noon, the worst rain had passed, but wind still moved through the old house, finding loose panes, closed chimneys, and every corridor where memory had been left unattended. A sudden crash came from below, not violent, only sharp enough to send a maid hurrying past Emily's door with a frightened face. Emily followed before thinking. In the eastern corridor, a tall window had blown inward from its latch, scattering rain across the floor and knocking a porcelain vase from its stand. The vase had broken into pale pieces near the wall. Servants gathered helplessly, not because the damage was great, but because it was in the forbidden wing. Mrs. Rowe arrived with keys in hand, her expression tight. Fetch cloths. Quickly, Emily knelt at once and began gathering the larger pieces into the edge of her apron. Miss Carter, you need not. The water will reach the carpet. You are a guest. I am useful. The answer was simple, and it silenced argument more effectively than pride would have. Together they worked, servants bringing towels, Mrs. Rowe holding the candle away from the draft, Emily pressing cloth along the rain-dark floorboards. When Henry appeared at the far end of the corridor, no one spoke. His gaze moved to the open window, the broken vase, the wet carpet, then to Emily kneeling among the servants with sleeves rolled back and wet hair loosening at her temples. Who allowed her here, he asked. Mrs. Rowe straightened. No one, Your Grace. She followed the noise. Emily rose slowly, holding a towel. The window needed closing. And you thought that was your duty? No, I thought it was a window. A footman lowered his head quickly to hide an expression. Henry saw it, but his attention remained on Emily. He had expected fear after the night before, perhaps apology, perhaps avoidance. Instead, she stood in the forbidden wing with rain on her cuffs, having treated his shrine of grief not as sacred theater, but as a room in a house where water could ruin would if no one moved. The practical mercy of it unsettled him. Leave the rest to the staff, he said. Of course. She handed the towel to Mrs. Rowe and stepped back. As she did, A paper slipped from the pocket of her borrowed dress and fell near Henry's boot. The old fold, the worn edge, the careful hand of a woman long gone. Emily reached for it, but Henry had already bent and lifted it. He did not open it fully. He saw only enough to read the first line. My dearest Emily. His face changed. Not curiosity, recognition. The private language of the dead. It is my mother's letter, Emily said, her voice quieter. I keep it with me. Henry returned it at once. Forgive me. The apology surprised them both. Emily tucked the letter safely away. There is nothing to forgive. There is always something. The words were almost not meant for her. Mrs. Rowe looked toward him, then toward the closed music room door. Henry noticed and hardened again. The window will be repaired. The eastern corridor remains closed. Yes, Your Grace, Mrs. Rowe said. Emily turned to go, but Henry spoke her name. Miss Carter. She faced him. Last night, in the music room, you spoke of forgiveness. The servants became very still. Henry's jaw tightened, as if he regretted allowing witnesses to the sentence. Did someone teach you that, or did you arrive at it by suffering? Emily held her mother's letter through the fabric of her pocket. Both, I think. And has it served you? Not always. Her gaze did not lower. But bitterness never protected me as well as I hoped it would. The rain softened outside the broken window. Henry looked at the damp floor, the gathered porcelain pieces, the servant girl who had arrived by mistake and was now standing in the part of his house where even loyal staff walked like trespassers. My wife loved this corridor, he said. The confession entered the air without ceremony, and because it did, no one dared disturb it. She said the morning light made the sea look almost kind. Emily looked toward the gray window. Perhaps it still does, on clear days. Henry did not answer, but he did not rebuke her either. When Emily left the corridor, he remained behind with Mrs. Rowe, staring at the open window, as if the storm had broken more than a latch. Hours later, from the blue room, Emily heard footsteps in the eastern wing. Not hurried, not angry. Then, faintly, the sound of a window being opened on purpose. For the first time since she had entered Ashford Hall, the air beyond her door smelled not of dust and old sorrow, but of rain leaving. By late afternoon, the rain had thinned into a silver mist, but the bridge remained closed, and Ashford Hall kept Emily Carter beneath its roof for one more night. She spent the hours mending a torn cuff on the borrowed dress, not because anyone had asked, but because her hands worked better than her thoughts when uncertainty pressed too closely. From the blue room window, she could see the eastern wing windows standing open for the first time since her arrival. Pale curtains stirred there like cautious breaths. Somewhere inside that forbidden corridor, Duke Henry Ashford had chosen air over dust, and the knowledge troubled her more gently than fear. Near supper, Mrs. Rowe appeared with a tray and a folded note. His Grace requests your presence in the small library after you have eaten. Emily looked at the note, but did not touch it at once. Requests? Yes. The housekeeper's tone made clear that she had noticed the word as carefully as Emily had. Not commands. Emily unfolded the paper. The handwriting was firm, spare, and without ornament. Miss Carter, if you are willing, I would ask you to tell me plainly whom you fled and whether he has legal claim to retrieve you. No answer will be demanded before you choose to give it. Henry Ashford. She read it twice. Men had ordered her life in the language of duty, gratitude, and debt. No one had ever written willing and choose as if they belonged to her. The small library was warmer than the rest of the house, with green lamps, dark shelves, and a fire low enough to comfort without overwhelming the room. Henry stood when she entered. He had done so before, out of rank and habit, but tonight the gesture felt less like ceremony and more like respect. A chair waited near the fire, not too close to his, with a folded blanket across the back. Tea sat on the table between them, poured into plain cups. Mrs. Rowe said you wished to speak, Emily said. Only if you wish to answer. She sat slowly. The fire clicked softly in the grate. Outside, the storm retreated toward the sea, leaving the old house listening. My uncle, Silas Carter, took me in after my mother died, she began. He said I owed him gratitude. Then food. Then rent for a childhood I had not asked him to purchase. By the time I was old enough to earn wages, every dollar seemed to belong to a debt he kept changing. Henry's face remained still, but his hand closed around the arm of his chair. And the marriage? A creditor. or a friend. I was never told which, and I was not permitted to refuse. My uncle said the agreement was sensible, that affection could follow security. Her voice did not break. She would not give Silas Carter the dignity of hearing his cruelty through tears, even in his absence. So I left, with $12 and a letter. Emily looked at him in surprise. I saw the coins when your bag opened near the hearth. Mrs. Rowe saw them as well. She worries thoroughly. Despite herself, Emily almost smiled. Then Mrs. Rowe is dangerous. The most dangerous person in this house. A brief warmth passed through the room, fragile but real. Then Henry leaned forward slightly. Did you sign anything? No. Did any court appoint your uncle guardian? Not that I know of. My mother trusted him because he was family. That was her only mistake. Henry looked toward the fire. Family is often where society hides its worst bargains. The bitterness in his voice did not belong to her story alone. Emily remembered the covered portrait, the dead music room, the wife named Margaret. Your Grace, she said carefully, why did you ask me to stay in this room tonight rather than let Mrs. Rowe question me? Because Mrs. Rowe would have been kinder. And you wish to be unkind? No, he looked at her then, with a weariness too honest for pride. I wish not to hide behind kindness performed by someone else. The answer silenced her. Henry reached to the table and picked up a folded paper sealed with plain wax. I have written to my solicitor in Boston. At first light, if the road opens, a rider will carry this. He will determine whether your uncle has any lawful claim and whether the debt he used against you exists as he described. Emily stared at the letter. Why would you do that? Because you entered my carriage by mistake, not my protection. Protection can become another cage. Yes, he said quietly. That is why I am telling you before the letter leaves. She looked down at her hands. The room blurred for a moment, not from tears, but from the terrifying relief of being believed without first being broken open for proof. You do not know that I am telling the truth. No, Henry said. But I know what it looks like when someone speaks from fear learned over years. And I know what it costs to leave a room everyone insists you must remain in. The fire settled lower. Emily lifted her gaze. Is that why the eastern wing was closed? The question was almost too much. She saw it in him. The old door inside, the one she had named by accident in the music room, moved against its hinges. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he answered, not fully but enough. My wife died after leaving that wing during a storm. I have spent years arranging the house as if stillness could alter what happened. Emily did not ask how. She did not ask why. She only said, stillness is not forgiveness. Henry closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the room seemed older and lighter at once. No, he said. I am beginning to understand that. Outside, the last rain fell from the gutters in slow, measured drops. Inside, two people sat with a letter between them. One written to free a woman from a false debt, and one unwritten, waiting inside a widowed duke who had finally begun to answer the dead with something other than silence. At dawn, Ashford Hall received a visitor before the road had fully dried. The sound of wheels came faintly through the thinning mist, then stopped at the front steps with a confidence that did not belong to any neighbor seeking shelter. Emily Carter heard it from the blue room, where she had been fastening the cuffs of the borrowed dress and folding her mother's letter back into her carpet bag. For one breath, she thought it might be the solicitor's rider. Then a man's voice rose below, sharp with ownership, and the little room seemed to lose its warmth. I know she is here. Do not pretend a girl like that enters a duke's house without leaving tracks. Silas Carter. Emily did not move. Fear has a strange way of returning a person to old rooms, even when the body stands somewhere new. She saw her uncle's parlor again, the polished table, the folded agreement, the creditor's satisfied hands resting over a walking stick. She heard the mild voice that had made her future sound like an invoice. A debt must be paid. She pressed her palm against the carpet bag, over the letter, until the paper's edges steadied her. Then she opened the door and stepped into the corridor. Below in the entrance hall, Mrs. Rowe stood like a locked gate between Silas Carter and the staircase. Beside him waited another man in a damp traveling coat, broad, wealthy-looking, and silent in the unpleasant manner of someone accustomed to being considered before he spoke. Emily knew him at once. Mr. Bartholomew Crane, the man her uncle had chosen. Miss Carter is under this roof by His Grace's permission, Mrs. Rowe said. Permission? Silas laughed without warmth. She is my niece. She ran from lawful family duty in the middle of the night. I will collect her now, and your master may avoid embarrassment." Emily reached the landing, and every face turned. Silas's expression changed first to relief, then annoyance, as if a misplaced object had finally been located but had inconvenienced him by standing upright. "There you are," he said. "Come down. You have made a spectacle large enough." Emily descended slowly. Her knees felt uncertain, but her chin did not lower. "I am not going with you. Do not be foolish. Mr. Crane has been patient beyond reason." Mr. Crane gave a small nod, almost courteous, almost bored. A misunderstanding can be forgiven if corrected promptly. Emily stopped 3 steps from the bottom. "I did not misunderstand. I refused." Silas's face tightened. A young woman without fortune does not refuse arrangements made for her protection. "You mean for your debt?" "Our debt," he said. "Family debt." "Then you may marry him." Mrs. Rowe's mouth did not move, but something in her eyes warmed. Silas stepped forward. "Enough. You will come now before this becomes uglier." A door opened at the far end of the hall. Duke Henry Ashford entered without haste, dressed in black mourning clothes, his expression composed in a way that made the entire hall feel colder and safer at once. He looked first at Emily, not as a rescuer claiming gratitude, but as a man confirming she still stood where she chose. Then he turned to Silas. "You are trespassing." Silas paled, then recovered with a clumsy bow. "Your Grace, I apologize for the intrusion. I came only to retrieve my niece. She is young, impressionable, and easily led by dramatic feelings." Henry's gaze did not shift. "She is 27. The number landed with the force of fact. Silas blinked. "Still, she is under my guidance." "By what legal authority?" Silence entered the hall. Mr. Crane looked towards Silas for the first time with mild irritation. "Her mother entrusted her to me," Silas said. "A private family matter." "Then you have no court appointment." "That is hardly necessary among decent people. Decent people do not sell unwilling women under the name of duty." The words were quiet. No raised voice. No theatrical fury. Yet the servants standing along the corridor seemed to straighten as if a bell had rung. Silas's eyes flashed. "Your Grace has been misinformed. My solicitor will determine that. A rider has already been sent to Boston." This time, fear showed plainly. Emily saw it and understood with sudden clarity that her uncle had always depended on speed, shame, and closed doors. Daylight and paperwork frightened him more than conscience ever had. Mr. Crane took a step back. "I was not told there would be legal scrutiny." Silas turned sharply. "Bartholomew, I prefer investments without public inconvenience." Mr. Crane bowed stiffly to Henry, avoided Emily's eyes, and moved toward the door. Silas stared after him as if the floor had vanished beneath his feet. "You have ruined everything," he hissed at Emily. Henry stepped between them before the words could reach her alone. "No, she has ended something that should never have begun." Silas opened his mouth, but Mrs. Rowe had already signaled the footman. No one touched him. No one needed to. The open door, the watching servants, and the Duke's stillness were command enough. Silas Carter left Ashford Hall with rainwater on his boots and defeat in his shoulders. When the door closed behind him, Emily realized she had not cried, not once. Henry turned to her. "He will not take you from this house. This house is not mine." "No," he said, "but fear has no claim here today." She looked at him then, at the widowed Duke who had spent years believing storms only took things from him. This morning, in the hall where grief had lived like law, he had used his power not to possess her, but to return her to herself. Outside, the clouds began to break over Ashford land, and Emily felt the first fragile warmth of a life no longer being negotiated by someone else. After Silas Carter left Ashford Hall, the house did not celebrate. It exhaled. The servants returned to their duties with quieter steps, but the silence had changed. It was no longer the fearful hush of a place afraid to wake old grief. It was the careful quiet after a door has been opened and no one yet knows how much light may enter. Emily Carter stood in the entrance hall long after the sound of her uncle's carriage faded down the wet drive. Her hands were folded at her waist. Her face remained composed. Only Mrs. Rowe saw how tightly she held herself together, as if one kind word might undo what cruelty had failed to break. "Come," the housekeeper said, not softly enough to embarrass her. "Tea first. Trembling later, if necessary." Emily almost smiled. Is trembling scheduled here? Everything is scheduled here. It prevents men from believing they invented order. From the far side of the hall, Duke Henry Ashford heard the exchange and turned away before either woman saw the brief movement near his mouth. He had defended Emily with the full weight of his name, yet now that the threat had gone, he felt the old danger of power more sharply than triumph. Protection could become possession if not watched carefully. Gratitude could be mistaken for affection by men too eager to be needed. He would not make a cage out of the shelter she had found by accident. Later that afternoon, the solicitor's first reply arrived by rider from Boston, the paper sealed against damp and delivered directly to the small library. Henry read it while Emily stood near the window, and Mrs. Rowe remained by the door as witness. The message was plain. No lawful guardianship existed. No signed promise bound Emily to Mr. Crane. Silas Carter's debt was personal, poorly recorded, and already under question. Emily was free to leave, free to work, free to refuse, free in all the ways she should never have needed a duke's letter to prove. When Henry finished reading, he placed the paper on the table and did not push it toward her until she looked ready to receive it. "This belongs to you," he said. Emily took it with both hands. For a moment, the document seemed heavier than her carpetbag had been in the storm. $12 and a letter had carried her into the unknown. One page of legal ink now returned her name to herself. "Thank you," she said. "My solicitor deserves more thanks than I do. Your solicitor did not open the door." "No, but neither did I lock it after you entered." That answer mattered more than he intended it to. Emily looked toward the window, where pale sunlight rested on the wet lawns. "The road is clear enough by morning." Then, Mrs. Rowe's eyes moved to Henry at once. Henry did not speak quickly. He felt the house listening through its walls, through the eastern wing windows left open, through the music room where the wind no longer touched the piano strings. "Yes," he said. "If you wish to go, arrangements will be made." Emily folded the solicitor's letter carefully. "I should go." The words were sensible. They were honorable. They struck the room like a closing gate. Henry bowed his head. "Then you shall." No argument. No command. No plea disguised as duty. That restraint nearly hurt more than if he had asked at once. Evening settled gently over Ashford Hall. Emily packed the borrowed dress folded clean, her mother's letter, and the legal paper that proved she belonged to no one. Before returning to the blue room, she passed the eastern corridor and found Henry standing in the open doorway of the music room. The cloth had been removed from the portrait. Duchess Margaret Ashford looked out from the wall in painted stillness, kind-eyed and young, with one hand resting on the piano. Emily stopped several feet away. "She was beautiful," she said. "Yes. You uncovered her. I thought hiding her did not honor her as much as I once believed." The firelight from the hall touched his face, revealing grief still present but no longer enthroned. "I blamed the storm," he said. "Then the carriage. Then the road. Then myself. Grief accepts any object if the heart needs somewhere to place it." Emily stood quietly, allowing the confession room enough to breathe. "And now?" Henry looked at the portrait, then at the open window where night air moved the curtains softly. "Now I think she would have hated this room being treated like a tomb." Emily felt the ache of that honesty. Most loved people would. He turned to her then. "Miss Carter, tomorrow when you leave, take Mrs. Rowe's direction to the dressmaker on Beacon Street. She is respectable and owes this house a favor. There will be work if you want it, wages paid directly to you, and a room above the shop with a window that opens." Emily stared at him. "You arranged that?" I inquired. "You may refuse. You thought of a window? You crossed a storm for freedom." It seemed ungenerous to offer a room without air. Her composure trembled, not because he had saved her, because he had listened. "Your Grace, I do not know how to repay such care. Do not repay it." His voice was low, live beyond the reach of the bargain that tried to claim you. The words settled between them, too powerful for courtesy and too restrained for anything less honorable. Emily looked once more at the uncovered portrait, the open window, the piano no longer sounding like a ghost. "And you?" she asked. "Will you live beyond yours?" Henry did not answer at once. Outside, the last clouds moved from the moon. "I am trying," he said. "For the first time in years, I am trying without asking the dead to forgive me before I forgive myself." She nodded, because anything more would have been too much. When she left him in the doorway, Ashford Hall seemed changed not by joy, but by permission. The storm had brought Emily there by mistake. Yet as she climbed the stairs toward her last night beneath its roof, she understood that some mistakes are only destiny arriving without proper manners. Morning came to Ashford Hall without thunder. The sky beyond the coast had cleared into a pale blue washed clean by storm, and sunlight moved across the wet lawns in long, quiet bands. Emily Carter stood in the entrance hall with her carpetbag in one hand and her mother's letter tucked safely inside her cloak. The solicitor's paper rested beside it, folded with care, proof that no uncle, no creditor, and no false family duty could claim her life again. Mrs. Rowe had packed bread, cheese, and tea in a small covered basket despite Emily's protests, insisting that freedom traveled better with provisions. The carriage waited outside, the same black carriage that had carried Emily into Ashford by mistake. In daylight, it seemed less like a trap of fate and more like a dark question waiting for an answer. Duke Henry Ashford stood near the open doors, gloved, composed, and more silent than the morning required. He had arranged everything properly. The driver knew the road to Beacon Street. The dressmaker had been notified. A room with a window had been secured above the shop. Every practical kindness stood in place, neat and honorable, leaving nothing for Emily to fear and very little for either of them to say. Mrs. Rowe says the bridge is safe, Emily said. Mrs. Rowe would not permit the bridge to be otherwise. A small breath of almost laughter touched her, but it faded quickly. Goodbyes make even gentle words feel fragile. Henry looked toward the eastern wing windows, now open to the sun. The music room will remain uncovered. Emily followed his gaze. I am glad. I may have the piano tuned. That sounds like hope. It sounds expensive. This time she did smile, and the sight of it struck him with a quiet force. Not because it was offered to him as a gift, but because it belonged to her entirely. A free woman's smile. A woman leaving under her own authority. He had no right to ask anything that might burden it. Mrs. Rowe appeared at the foot of the stairs, eyes suspiciously bright and voice severe enough to defend them. The driver has checked the wheels twice. Any more checking, and the horses will begin to feel insulted. Emily turned to her. Thank you for your kindness. Nonsense. I was efficient. Kindness is less reliable. Yet when Emily stepped forward, Mrs. Rowe took her hands for one brief moment, then released them as if affection were a household duty best performed briskly. Emily descended the front steps. The air smelled of wet earth, sea salt, and early spring. At the carriage door, she stopped. Her gloved hand rested on the handle. The open road lay before her, and beyond it Boston, work, a window, wages paid to her own name. This was what she had run toward. This was what she had wanted when she climbed into the wrong carriage with rain in her eyes and terror behind her. So why did leaving feel like stepping away from a room where something living had only just begun to breathe? Miss Carter, Henry said. She turned. He had followed no farther than propriety allowed, standing at the edge of the steps with the morning light on his face. I have no claim to ask anything of you. His voice was controlled, but not cold. That difference mattered. You have every right to leave and every reason to begin somewhere untouched by this house. Emily held the carriage handle. Then why do you sound as if there is more? For a moment, he looked less like a duke than a man standing before the first honest risk he had taken in years. Because there is. The driver looked away. Mrs. Rowe became intensely interested in the basket clasp. Henry came down one step, no farther. Stay, he said. The word was not command. It was nearly a confession. Not because you owe me. Not because I protected you. Not because this house is grand enough to make gratitude look like destiny. Stay because when you entered it, the rooms I had made into memorials remembered they were rooms. Stay because I breathed differently after you came through the door. Stay because I would rather learn how to live honestly with you near than return to surviving politely alone. Emily's hand tightened on the carriage handle. The world did not become simple. She was still poor. He was still a duke. Margaret's portrait still watched from the eastern wing. Boston still waited with a room and work and a life of her own. Honor required that none of this be erased by feeling. And if I stay, she asked quietly, what would I be? Henry's answer came without haste, because he had feared the question enough to make it honest. First, free. Always free. Mrs. Rowe can arrange a paid position if you wish one, or the carriage can take you to Boston tomorrow, or next week, or whenever you decide. No door in this house will close behind you by my command. Emily looked toward Ashford Hall. The open windows. The eastern wing no longer dark. The stone steps washed clean. And to you? She asked. His face changed, not with desire, not with certainty, but with reverence for what could not be rushed. A guest I respect. A woman I trust. A presence I would be grateful to know, for as long as she chooses to remain. Mrs. Rowe looked down, and even the severe old housekeeper could not hide the softness in her mouth. Emily turned from the carriage. She thought of her mother's letter, of polished tables where she had been told her worth was negotiable, of the storm that had carried her into a house where grief and dignity had met like two candles in a long dark hall. Then she lifted her hand from the carriage door. 1 week, she said, as a free woman. Henry bowed his head. As a free woman. And after that, I decide again. Every day if you wish. She stepped back from the carriage. The driver closed the door without comment. Mrs. Rowe took the basket from the seat and said briskly, Then I shall not waste good cheese on a journey postponed. The absurdity of it broke the last brittle edge of the moment, and Emily laughed softly. Henry heard that laugh move through Ashford Hall, like music returning before the piano had even been tuned. In the weeks that followed, Emily remained first for 7 days, then for another 7 by choice. The room above the Beacon Street shop waited, but no longer as escape. It became a possibility, not a rescue. She helped Mrs. Rowe reopen the eastern rooms, catalog Margaret's music, and arrange fresh linen in chambers that had slept too long beneath dust. Henry wrote to Boston, not to hide from society, but to answer it with dignity. He did not forget his wife. He stopped asking grief to keep her alive by keeping himself half dead. By early summer, the piano was tuned, the bridge repaired, and lavender planted near the south windows where rain had once beaten hardest. No vows were rushed. No title was offered like a reward. What grew between Emily Carter and Henry Ashford grew with the patience of gardens after storms. Root first, bloom later, and only where the soil had been made honest. People would later say she entered the wrong carriage. They would be wrong in the way people often are when they mistake accident for destiny. She entered a carriage that carried her away from a bargain and toward a house that needed to breathe. Some hearts do not ask to be saved loudly. They only open one door during a storm and beg the right soul to stay long enough for morning.